Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric, I'm the account manager at Connecting Up in New Zealand. We are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges by creative use of technology. For those of you that haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate training of online webinars, workshops, boot camps, and webcoms to help upskill the social sector in all digital areas. Check out our training and education menu on our website for more details. Today, I'm really excited to welcome you to join today's webinar, which is what will it take to create a cyber-safe future for NFPs? Now, this is going to be a panel discussion and it features speakers from Info Exchange, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Foundation House. Now, before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. All the lines are going to be muted, so if you've got any technical issues, type that into the questions box and I'll do my best to assist you with that as we go throughout the session. If you've got any questions during the webinar, please also type that in the questions box. We really encourage you to ask questions. We love interactive sessions, so please do type those in. I'll be passing those on to Nicola, who will be moderating the Q&A section. Now, if you're on a Wi-Fi connection and you've got multiple programs open, please just try and close down the other programs that you've got. That does sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video that you'll be getting, and we want you to have the best experience that you can today. Now, final note from myself, this webinar is being recorded and we'll be sending through a link to the recording to you in 1 to 2 business days, so keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, a short survey will also be featured at the end of the webinar once it closes down, so if you could take that, we'd really appreciate your feedback. Otherwise, that's it for me, so I will hand over to the panel now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome everyone. I'm Ambika. I'm one of the directors at PwC in the Cyber and Digital Trust team, and it's a privilege to be here today to talk about how we can secure the future of not-for-profits. I would like to begin by acknowledging the beautiful ancestral lands we are all meeting on today, right across Australia and indeed across the world. Here in Australia, I want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians, whose over 65,000 years of tradition, culture, and knowledge we continue to learn and benefit from today. Today, I'm in Sydney, which is the lands of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to elder past, present, and future. I also acknowledge that we are joining this panel discussion virtually, so we are meeting on different Australian lands, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of your lands where you are on and wherever you are, and pay respects to the elder past, present, and future. So by welcoming all of you, I also want to welcome the panelists that we have today, and we've got 4 very knowledgeable and passionate panelists on the floor today, starting with Peter Milan. He's one of the partners at Cybersecurity and Digital Trust teams, and he leads the Cybersecurity Digital Trust team at PwC with over 15 years of experience in IT risk information security, internal audit in the UK and Australia. He will be talking about what can we do to secure the future as well as the threat landscape, etc. today. We've also got Marcus Harvey, who's a manager at Digital Transformation Hub at Info Exchange. Marcus is an experienced facilitator and not-for-profit technology expert. He and his team are passionate about helping organizations use technology effectively to work smarter rather than harder and secure them as well. Then we've got Siobhan, who's a general manager, Corporate Services Foundation House. Siobhan runs an organization which supports and empowers thousands of survivors of torture and traumatic events to rebuild their lives. A very important cause, and today she will be sharing a lot of her experience working in this space, as well as she's got responsibility for a full suite of corporate services, including information security, that enables 200 staff to deliver high-quality services to refugee background survivors, their families, and communities. So welcome, Sean. And finally, we've got Nicola Brian. She is a senior manager at our Cybersecurity and Digital Trust practice at PwC, and she has a strong focus on clear communication, strives to present technical information to non-technical audiences in relevant and meaningful manner, and also works with not-for-profit sector as part of PwC social impact program. So welcome all the panelists. And before I jump into the panel discussion, I would like to ask a question to the audience so we can make some interaction before we get into the panel discussion. Eric, if you can bring the question up, we would like to understand from your perspective, what do you think? how many NFPs in percentages have indicated poor management of data or average management of data in their organizations. We'll give you 60 seconds to respond to this question, and then we'll see what is your perspective on what percentage of NFPs think the data management practices are average or poor. All right, I think we've got some responses. 35% say 52% and 40% say 70%. So there's not a huge difference. The correct answer is actually 52%. So more than half of the population within NFPs think that the data management practices are average or poor, though this was based on a report that was published by Governance Institute. And I think this tells us that there's a lot of improvement opportunities in this space for the not-for-profit sector. And we have seen from recent incidents how data can be very important when it belongs to citizens of Australia. So thank you for participating in this question. Now we'll get to the panel discussion and hear from some of our experts on what their viewpoints are and what does the future hold. So I'll begin by asking a question to Pete and Marcus. Why do you think building a robust cybersecurity capability is critical, given we are facing a lot of threats from a cyber perspective and breaches that we've seen recently? So Pete, what is your perspective on that?
Thanks very much, Ambika, and yeah, good to be able to present today on this important topic. Look, Ambika, it's fair to say that cyber is very topical at the moment, being front page news and being in discussions over the recent incidents that we've had. And I'd say we're definitely operating in a heightened cyber threat environment. And this has been going on for some time, but in particular really has amplified during the pandemic, where we've seen the move to hybrid working, the increased adoption of digital technologies as well. But I'd say in some regards, we'd almost be desensitized to the number of incidents that were getting reported. But I think yeah, everyone's senses have been heightened when it comes to cyber as a result of really some quite pervasive issues that we've seen recently. I thought it might be useful quickly just to talk about what some of the trends are that we're seeing, just to give the the audience a view on what we're seeing, not only locally but also globally, because they do match quite consistently. When it comes to the threats, ransomware is by far and away the biggest threat that we are seeing. And as I mentioned before, this is something over the last 2 years through the pandemic has increased as well. And we've seen a shift in that ransomware. It's not just about locking up organisations' data, but it's also extracting data. So not only the hackers locking file systems and like, but they're also extracting and then holding organisations to ransom for that data as well. So been a bit of a shift, and it is a lot more accessible for hackers to be able to get their software to be able to conduct that. The other one I want to touch on is supply chain risk. So we've seen increased number of attacks through the supply chain. Quite often it's seen as a backdoor to organisations who might have reasonable controls as well. And phishing, so clicking on emails or text message or even voice now still is one of the main avenues that we see cyber attacks occurring through. So ransomware through someone clicking on an email. It's fair to say that hackers are discriminant. So it is all shapes and sizes of organisations that we are seeing impacted. From large account against to small organisations, as a lot of those who are joining the call today. So that's just some of what we're seeing out there. Maybe hand to Marcus to provide his view.
Great.
Thanks, Peter. And from my perspective, I think a lot's changed over the last few years, particularly across the not-for-profit sector. In order to continue to deliver critical services to people in need, a large proportion of organizations had to rapidly move to the cloud, enable people to connect, video conference, share files, and work effectively so that they can support their clients, their members, their supporters, etc. And the great thing about the cloud is that the cloud allows you to access information from anywhere. The problem about the cloud is it allows you to access information from anywhere, including those hackers potentially in overseas countries that want to get access to stuff and then usually use it for other purposes, whether it be ransomware, whether it be then trying to get money and extortion out of the organization, etc. And so with the rapid move, particularly within the not-for-profit sector, into the cloud, and so that people can continue to deliver critical services, sometimes cybersecurity was not implemented as robustly if a more considered and planned approach was taken. And so what we're finding now is that a lot of organizations are playing a bit of catch up. They've been through that rapid transition to the cloud. They've all of a sudden been able to continue to deliver services. Staff are getting used to all these new changes. But one of the challenges is a lot of attacks rely these days on individual human fallibilities. And ensuring staff understand the risks, they can spot them, they know what to do when they arrive, because no one's infallible. There's also a process to make sure that when there are issues, they're able to be dealt with without organizational risk, and the organization has that core cybersecurity in place is really what we're seeing a lot of organizations now start to work through. We found last year, I think, in our digital technology survey, one of those core, if you like, foundational elements we consider. Have you got, multi-factor authentication on your core sensitive information that's accessible via the cloud? About 1 in 2 did. This year, early indication, we've just closed our survey, still doing the analysis, but that's jumped up significantly. So that's really pleased. But we're still seeing 1 in 3, 1 in 4 haven't taken one of those really basic protections. That's fairly easy to do. And so we're really keen, because of the sensitive data that non-for-profits often hold, health information, people that are challenged, organizations work in housing, family violence, counseling, all those sorts of things, to make sure that that information is protected. I wish the Optus breach had never happened. I got caught up in that through no fault of my own. But the good thing that's come out of that is it's a lot more topical to talk about and say, okay, what are we doing as a result of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this clearly describes why cybersecurity is critical. And you touched on challenges. So I actually wanted to throw it to Siobhan and Nicola to talk about some of the challenges that you've seen at not-for-profits, where you can actually see why cybersecurity is still not a bigger priority as compared to digital innovation and transformation in these organizations. So Siobhan, I'll start with you because you work for a not-for-profit. What are the challenges that you see today?
Thanks, Sambi. Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I think challenges for my organisation and a lot of other not-for-profits is also always that challenge between the allocation of resources, between frontline service delivery and the back end, the engine room, which is the area that I manage at Foundation House. That balance of priorities between providing the services to the clients and the communities that you serve, but also providing resources to the people and the systems and the structures that provide a framework in which you can do that safely. And I think that's very, well illustrated in the area of digital security, because we at Foundation House, we have not only legal obligations, but we've also got ethical and moral obligations to keep the data, keep the information of our clients and communities safe. So I think that's a common thread amongst a lot of NFPs.
Great. And And that's a very good point, like holding that data and how much of that to hold and till what time. So data retention and data management is quite an important area and intersects with cybersecurity. And I'm seeing a lot of intersection between cybersecurity and privacy coming together, and we'll see a lot more in regulatory space in the future on this. And Nicola, I know you worked for a not-for-profit before. What is your perspective on some of the challenges?
I mean, to build on what we've heard from Siobhan and Marcus, I think in the sector there are some really unique challenges. One of them being, as Siobhan's touched on, the sensitivity and the value in the data that they hold. And this is not just, typical corporate data. It can be very sensitive records and also records of the donor base for those not-for-profits involved in fundraising. They might have very sensitive financial information about a wide number of people in the community, which can be very appealing to hackers. So I think they have this combination of sensitive data to protect and value, and also funding can be really challenging in the not-for-profit sector. So the organisation I've come from previously, as a good example, received grant funding to operate, and those grants can often come with quite clear conditions in terms of how funding can be allocated to overheads versus project delivery. And all not-for-profits are under pressure, I think, to report on overheads generally, and there's a view in the sector, not the sector itself, but within the community that, overheads are a negative and that we need to be getting all the money onto the projects that are relevant. But we know that we need to have the engine room running smoothly to be able to deliver those services. So it's the ongoing battle to adequately resource the spend on cyber and to properly protect that really important data that you need to maintain trust with your community and also meet your obligations around. So those would be the key challenges I see specifically for not-for-profits.
That's right, and not uniquely for not-for-profits, what we see is compliance versus risk management. Where does the boundary lie, and how do you move from compliance to risk management? Requires tone from the top. So I want to talk about what role can the boards and leadership play when we think about the constraints and the challenges that we just spoke about. And I'll start with you, Siobhan, and then through to others. What do you think the boards and leadership can do to elevate the role of cybersecurity for not-for-profits?
Yeah, thanks, Ambika. I mean, I know at Foundation House, our board is, hyper alert to the threat that the cyber environment is producing at the moment. And I think that the boards and senior management need to provide leadership so that the frameworks, the structures can be put in place, and boards need to satisfy themselves that those frameworks are appropriate, that they're well resourced, that they provide a level of security. I know at Foundation House, as I mentioned, we've got legal obligations, we've also got moral and ethical obligations. Our clients are refugee survivors of torture and other traumatic events. They've experienced massive human rights violations. Their health records contain information about the absolute worst experiences of their lives and things that perhaps, you and I and people on the webinar possibly can't quite imagine. And so, we've got a very grave responsibility to keep that data protected, particularly because trust is essential to the therapeutic relationship, and it's trust that has been violated by their pre-arrival experiences. And I think the board and management need to be cognizant of that and need to lead to make sure those frameworks are in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, what is your perspective? Because I know you work with a lot of boards and executives on cybersecurity. So how can they play a bigger role?
Thanks, Ambika. I definitely agree with what Siobhan is saying. I mean, everyone has a role to play when it comes to cyber, and that means the top of the house all the way down to through organisations. It is all our responsibility. It's not just the technology person or the people providing those services to your organisation. And tone for the top is critical, right? So those messages, and where I've seen organisations successfully driving security awareness campaigns and programs, it's really been led from the top, right? So key messages being delivered from those boards and also from executive management as well around the importance of this. And for me, the word that I pick up from Siobhan is trust, right? At the end of the day, whether it's not for profit, whether it's commercial, I mean, just look at those organisations that are on the front page of the papers over the last couple of weeks, and think that impact of trust, and trust being something that can take years to build, but can be lost within seconds as a result of incidents. So for me, that's some of the key messages is not only them having that knowledge and understanding of what those risks are, how that should be driven within the organisation, but just pushing that tone from the top is a critical aspect, and that we all have a role to play.
Absolutely, and not-for-profit is something that builds on trust, runs on trust. It's the fabric of the not-for-profit sector, very much so. Marcus, do you want to add anything from your perspective to this?
Yeah, I'll make a short comment. You know, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report earlier this year found that 82% of breaches involve the human element. So my big comment is that if you've got a bunch of technical protections in place, but you haven't got the human side looked after, you're going to be one of those 4 in 5 breaches that are still at risk. So, you know, it's the best way of getting the human element engaged. It's not the IT team, it's not your cybersecurity expert. They're good at putting the technical protections in place, but the board and the management team are the ones that need to support engagement of staff and the organisation as that broader whole to make sure that that information is still protected. Because unfortunately, and I wish it was different, technology alone can't do it.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. And Nicola, you were presenting to a board recently for a not-for-profit. What do you think from your perspective?
Look, I totally agree the tone from the top is crucial. I think the other key role that leadership can do is really translate cybersecurity away from technical concepts. So the cyber teams will be talking about things like confidentiality, integrity, availability, or tactics and processes. The leadership can really do a great job translating that into talking about risk and talking about the importance of trust across the organisation and really grounding cybersecurity across the overall organisation's values and mission. And at that point, it becomes much more relatable for the staff and you can understand the value of what you're doing. And technical teams traditionally, I hate to say it, are not good at sort of broadening the message and the conversation, and they need leadership to step into that role and be comfortable enough talking about cyber to really take the leadership and move beyond awareness to really lead and drive the change that needs to happen across organisations to build that really secure culture that will be the layer of protection that sits across the top of the technical controls you might be putting in place.
Absolutely, that's a great point to highlight. When we talk about tone from the top, there's also, like Pete said, it's everyone's responsibility, but do people have the right skills is another big question, and do we have the talent available to be able to drive that messaging? So as part of a recent PwC not-for-profit survey, it was identified that upskilling is still one of the lowest ranked areas in terms of upskilling. And I want to throw this question at the panelists. How do you think not-for-profits are experiencing the skill shortage and the talent fight that the whole industry and economy is having on cybersecurity? I'll start with you, Marcus, on that. And what's your perspective on skills shortage development?
Look, I think it's really tough. As a not-for-profit tech professional, it's always really hard to get good quality technical staff and or advice, irrespective of you being in a skills shortage era. With what we're currently seeing with the skills challenges and getting good staff and, you know, the employment rate, which is great, you know, everyone gets fully employed, but there are these challenges. And that's really the challenge for us as organizations working in the sector. Where do we find those good partners? What do we do in-house so that we have those core protections in place without, you know, spending too much money or doing it as cost effectively as possible. I know Siobhan's had similar challenges and she works at the front line, so really keen to hear her perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Look, I think education is really key, equipping people with the skills and knowledge that you said, Ambika, is really important. But you've got to have the people in place to be able to impart that knowledge. Yep. And it is a tough recruitment environment. We've experienced difficulty recruiting to our corporate services team. But I think that's from a not-for-profit point of view, that's where the values alignment comes in. And so it's a value proposition that's not just based on salary, because of course not-for-profits can't compete, in the corporate market. But I think that's where our strength lies in not-for-profits is attracting people because of the values alignment, and that imbues everything that we do, including, providing, secure data platforms for our client information, for example.
Great, yeah, and definitely there's room for reskilling and getting people from various different backgrounds and reskilling them to provide them with new employment opportunities and new employee value propositions as well. Pete, what is your perspective on upskilling and reskilling to meet the demand?
Yeah, thanks, Ambika. It is a great point, and people sort of think, oh, I don't have an IT background, so I can't work in cyber, and we're finding, as you know, cyber is a multifaceted issue that we're dealing with. Yes, technical skills are important in some aspects, but they're not the be-all and end-all. And what we're finding is we're recruiting people from a range of different backgrounds, that have got a willingness to learn and get involved in what is an interesting area to help organisations, including NFPs, with protecting themselves. So, from a PwC perspective, for instance, we've got involved in higher apprentice schemes where people have had different careers and they're coming through being trained that way. We'll take any background that we can to help train it up, and I think that's important. I am seeing generally a more awareness about cyber and interest in this, and for me that's probably the key thing, right? Getting access to people who are interested, want to get involved, and to Siobhan's point too around values alignment. Not saying that that's easy. I mean, there is a war on talent when it comes to those people out there who are highly skilled. But there's a lot, and we'll again all have a role to play here in building, and I say we, the collective, whether it's firms such as PwC or like, to actually build that capability, for the benefit of all Australian organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicola, I would throw to you because you definitely don't come from cyber background, so your experience transitioning into this sector as well as upskilling for the future. What's your perspective on that?
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be in the role that I'm in currently, and I'm definitely, onto my third career at this point. So I think there are great opportunities in the field, and it's a field that's not going to shrink anytime soon because increasingly organisations really need to address cybersecurity. So I encourage all employers to look to a diverse hiring pool and think about the tendencies and attributes that you're looking for in employees, and teach them the technical side. But that can sound a little bit, I guess, fluffy in the current market where you have pressing needs and you need to get the job done. So I think, keen to hear from Marcus too about some of the initiatives out there where maybe NFPs can tap into resources if they don't have them in-house, or other opportunities to sector-wide try and solve some of these talenting sort of resourcing issues in creative ways, because I know it's not always an easy thing to fill an open position and just hit the ground running.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the cyberspace, that's a tough one. Sort of the Digital Transformation Hub, one of the services we do offer is an expert bar, which looks at connecting non-profits with a need, with an expert that's willing to provide up to 3 sessions at no cost for organisations to assist them through that challenge, advice, new service they need. And so that's something we're really proud of in terms of making those connections, and also working with the goodwill of the corporate sector. PwC is one of the partners on the bar, who's able to provide some cybersecurity services and assistance if an organisation needs some guidance and help through that journey. And so what we're really trying to do is both through that as well as through our in-house expertise and the products and services we've bought at discount values or discount amounts, especially for the sector, is upskill the sector to give them what they need and create a cyber security secure future as well.
Absolutely, and I think collaboration, and that's my perspective. I know I'm not a pundit, but I'm just adding to that collaboration with industry, with government, and within the sector, I think is the key to solving this skills challenge. Moving on from skills to thinking about, yes, we're working from home, it's a more hybrid working environment, and COVID has changed how we operate now. So with this rapid change, how do you think NFPs should prioritize their efforts in cybersecurity, and which is one area where you think they should be prioritizing their efforts in when we talk about the hybrid workforce? So I'll start with Siobhan. You are in a not-for-profit organization, and where are you focusing your efforts right now when it comes to cybersecurity?
Sorry, Ambika, did you go to me? That just glitched out for a minute.
I was saying, as part of a not-for-profit organization, where are you seeing that you're focusing your cybersecurity investment and efforts in with the hybrid workforce arrangements that are now pretty natural and normal after COVID?
Yeah, thank you. Look, we've worked really hard with Marcus and his team from Info Exchange to focus on upskilling a certain number of our staff. I think that's really important, particularly in the hybrid environment. And also we're just working at the moment on, for us, quite a sophisticated digital security policy and procedure, which we'll be rolling out, and that will really support people to use their devices because they're using them at home, they're using them at cafes, they're using them on the road, to use them in a safe manner. So I think that's a really important focus. I think education and information is really important, and I think that goes to what Peter was saying before about establishing a culture that no matter where you're working, and if you're working with the Foundation House device, and if you're working with Foundation House information, that it also always has to be in a secure setting, and it always has to be given the respect that it's due.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. And Nicola, what's your thinking on where NFPs should focus their investment and budget on?
Thinking about how the workforce changed over COVID, there are a couple of things that spring to mind. One thing we've seen is that a lot of people, employees and management, had to quickly discover sort of workarounds to get them through roadblocks in the last year or so, or 2 years, I think. And we're seeing a lot of what we call shadow IT, so a lot of systems and applications being used by teams which are not actively managed by your organisation's IT team. And they might be free apps and websites people have made accounts to use to do some data crunching, make some charts. They could be tools like we're seeing today sitting in the webinar that people have used when their approved platform didn't work one day. There's been a proliferation of accounts created and your staff using systems that you might not even be aware of. And I think now's a good time to take stock of that. One of the organisations we worked with recently found kind of a couple of tiers. So you've got the systems managed by IT, then you've got divisions and groups within your organisation who as a team have decided to use a different platform or piece of software, and then you've got the employees who have made autonomous decisions. And when you think about how quickly data is moving around between systems and APIs that connect bits and pieces together, I think it's a really good time for organisations to do a bit of an inventory and take stock and think about applying some cyber thinking. Was this a good decision to use this platform or this piece of software? What security do they have in place? Do we trust their level of protection of data? So that's one area that I think is definitely time well spent to understand. And the other thing we're seeing with clients, and not just NFPs, but across the corporate sector, is we almost need to do a bit of retraining around how to work in a communal workspace again as people come back to the office. So people arriving in the office with their password on a post-it note on their computer, or people jumping on planes and working on a presentation because they're traveling again and they've kind of forgotten that whole pair of beady eyes in the seat behind who was sort of peeking through the gap between seats to see what you're working on. There's really a good opportunity now just to reground everybody, and you'd be surprised, I think, at how basic that training and education piece can be. There are some really simple behaviours that, just the same way we've been wearing trackies and UGG boots way too much, we've probably developed some unsafe cyber behaviours that maybe were less important when we were at home, but now that we're coming back together, there's definitely a re-education piece there that I think, no matter the size of your organisation, and I would say the same thing to one of the big 4 banks, we could all benefit from just a bit of a reskilling. So those would be the 2 things I think out of COVID that I'd focus on.
Thank you. Pete, do you want to add anything to that? And then I'll throw to you, Marcus.
No, I don't think so. I think, yeah, Nicola have picked up the key points, and I think there's a theme that's definitely coming through this discussion. It's around education and awareness, right? And this is definitely something I've seen, not just in the not-for-profit sector, but across the board, where that was a necessity to keep businesses operating, where risk management might have been sort of put to the side just because of that necessity. And a lot of organisations, in my experience, haven't actually gone back to make sure that that those areas had been dealt with now, and that had been assessed. So it's probably the only point I'd make, Baker.
Thank you. Marcus, what about you?
Yeah, look, I think there was some great stats in your last survey of non-profit CEOs that found 30% of organisations are not considering or have made no progress on establishing a cybersecurity uplift program. And I think, and in my experience, the number could actually be higher than that. A lot of organisations are struggling with, where do I focus my, strengthening activities, and because it is hard. From my perspective, the first step is really get those basics in place. Have you got multi-factor authentication on your secure data stores in the cloud? Have you trained your staff? Have you engaged your execs? Do you know where your data is stored and how well it's protected? Do you have appropriate backups in place? Get those core in place, then move to a risk management approach. So once you've got the quick wins, if you like, under control, and that risk management approach is then going to look more deeply about, where are the issues? Where do you get greatest bang for buck? How are you going against the ACSC's, or Australian Cybersecurity Centre's Essential 8 controls? What do you need to progress over the next sort of 12, 24 months, and how do you do that and test those controls to make sure that those are appropriate? So start with the basics, the quick wins that are going to deliver value for everyone, so you don't sit there thinking it's really big. There's just sort of 5 or 6 things that are really simple. Then start to work through the more the mid-level or the less basic controls to get to tune to your organization and make sure you do protect your data effectively.
Absolutely. I think there has to be this tiered approach, and incidents will happen, and you cannot have a zero appetite for cyber incidents, but preparing for that prevention, detection, and response is really critical. And like Marcus said, focus on the basics and then move on to the next steps to mature your capability. And
maybe I'll pick up on a point quickly that Marcus made. I mean, the majority of the incidents that we get involved in, organisations have been hacked, or we actually, through our research, have been not due to sophisticated attackers. They have been due to the basics not being in place. Having deadbolts on your front door and bars on the windows on the front of the house, but leaving the windows and back door wide open and allowing someone just to sail in. So it really is such a critical point that's been raised about putting two-factor. The impact of two-factor has on the mitigation to stop cyber attacks is significant. And just quickly, the only other point to raise, and something that's come through this recent incident, it's touched on a couple of times here, is about data management, data governance, right? So you're looking at the type of, and particularly for not-for-profits, what data are you holding, where is it, how are you securing it, and making sure that do you really actually need to retain some of that, and reflecting on your data retention approaches as well. And for those organisations that rely on third parties, these are the types of questions you should be asking them through your processes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well pointed, Pete. I'm just conscious of time. This would be my last question before I go on to the next interactive activity. If you had to suggest to ask a question in terms of what NFP should be asking for from their board and management, what is one question that comes to mind that you would advise NFPs to ask? And I'll start with you, Siobhan.
I think NFPs should be asking themselves, what's the most important information asset that we hold? And for us, it's the health records of our clients. And so making that decision informs your approach to digital information security or cyber security, because you can prioritize your action plan and you can assess your risks.
Pete, what would you recommend?
I'd be asking yourselves how are you currently educating your users, right, and your employees, and also those customers or members, right, are part of your organisations. I think for me that's one of the critical. And I'm going to steal another question too, is for those that do have third parties, you asking them the question, right? How are you protecting our data, and what businesses do you have in place?
Very critical. And what we are seeing is third parties and then fourth parties. There's the whole supply chain that comes into picture and how they're protecting data. And what Siobhan said, the best way to start is probably thinking about how you're protecting your data. Where is the data sitting and what is that data? Marcus, what would be your one question that you would recommend?
I'd be asking for resources to support a cybersecurity improvement program. It's very hard to drive improvement without, whether you need money, whether you need a little bit of staff capacity, but making sure there's some resource available and doesn't get subsumed by all the organisational priorities that already exist in a not-for-profit. That's the thing that I would be saying, get that support from your management and your board.
Awesome. Yeah, without that, we won't be able to action much. Nicola, what would be your one question that you would recommend? You're on mute, Nicola, I think.
I think Nicola's having some technical issues there. But
yeah, she might have some technical issues. While Nicola, are you back? No. All right. While we are waiting for Nicola, and we'll come back to you, Nicola, once the technical issue is sorted, can we bring the poll question? So we have a poll question for the audience to participate in. And we would like to know your perspective on what percentage of NFPs indicated in a recent survey that they aren't considering or haven't made any progress on establishing a cyber uplift program. This was based on a recent survey that was done by PwC, and it would be great to get your perspective. We'll give it 60 seconds. All right, let's see if we've got responses. Very cool. So Majority of the responses have said 30%, and that's actually the right answer. So I think some people have been listening into the conversation very nicely, as Marcus has mentioned this in one of the answers he gave. And this number may be higher, to be honest. While 48% of the respondents in the survey said they have made significant or moderate progress, as a sector, there's a lot more to do. And in order to secure the future, we would require to ask those questions that the panelists suggested, but get together, cooperate with each other, collaborate more to solve this problem of cyber. Nicola, have you been able to sort out the tech issue? No, I don't think so. Okay. Well, any other comments, final comments before we go to the Q&A from the panelists? Okay. Eric, we will go to the Q&A, and now we've got about 12 minutes to go. So let's see if there are any questions, and Nicola will come to my room and join from here.
Not a problem. Thanks, Ambika. Now we have got a question that I've passed through to Nicola, and I know she's in transit, so I'll read out the question while Nicola's moving along here. And yes, again, encourage everyone to ask questions if they'd like, but we have got a question that's come in from Jeffrey here. Jeffrey said that we've recently experienced a password compromise, that of our CEO. This resulted with a phishing email sent to my CEO's contacts and delivered from his mailbox. It therefore appeared legitimate. Action taken included applying MFA for our senior executives and preventing the use of Microsoft 365 outside of Australia. Are there other preventative measures to the ones we have implemented that we could take?
Maybe I'll jump in there for that question as well. Nicola and Ambika are sorting out their technical challenges. So, look, I think from the actions you've taken to date are good starting points in terms of helping address this. You know, we see this is a very common threat for organisations, and a significant number of organisations have lost a lot of money as a result of these business email compromises. I think the important bit is to make sure that those people within your organisation are all aware about the likelihood and chance of these emails coming through. And someone once said to me, one of the most powerful cybersecurity devices is actually, you know, your mobile phone. If you're not sure about something, pick up the phone and ring and say, you know, did you provide this? We know that some of these attackers are becoming sophisticated and actually sending these emails at times when people are traveling and the like, so it's harder to get hold of. But, you know, falling back and reminding people about your basic controls you have in place around invoice approval, about all that, and not subverting those controls would be the other thing I'd probably mention.
Thanks, Pete. Any other comments from the panelists?
Oh yeah, look, I've got a few
I just second
as well.
that, Ambika. Oh, sorry, Marcus. Just having systems in place that everyone's aware of to verify any kind of request of that kind, I think is really important. And that goes down to people. You know, people make mistakes, but people also have the power to make sure, verify a request. You know, we've all been subject to phishing and whaling attempts, and we need to learn from those experiences.
Yeah, definitely. This weakest link can be your strongest link as well to manage this.
Yes.
Marcus, you're going to add something as well.
Yeah, just a few. I suppose I would say there are things you can do to reduce the chance of those phishing emails getting through to your CEO and others within the organisation, whether that's implementing things like DKIM and some of the more advanced protections to highlight those phishing challenges. Second thing is, some organisations we're also working with at the moment are looking at either tweaking their Office 365 phishing and mail scam rules or purchasing additional options to the third-party options, Mailguard, and there's plenty of others out there as well, just to make sure that they ensure they reduce that risk. If you haven't already, get that training happening. We've harped on that a few times already this morning, but you didn't mention that. I assume you also contacted everyone that email went out to, just to make them aware of it. And the last one is, I would also suggest that you might want to consider enabling MFA for everyone in the organisation. The comment was that you've done it for the executives. I think, yes, the executives are important. Yes, we also do recommend that those with financial authority do need some added training, added protections, etc. But I would also suggest that, or our recommendation is, everyone should have MFA, particularly in an Office 365 environment.
Absolutely, and not just for professional, but also personal accounts and social media accounts that you use. That's really, really important. We have
another question. Another question which has come through, and sorry for the technical difficulties, but the power of technology when I side by side. Questions coming through, how do I know if I'm prepared? So if I'm doing the things and I'm investing the resources, what's the best way to understand my readiness or how my organisation might be resilient to a cyber incident? It's a question that's come through. I might pass that to Peter for the first pass, and then we can discuss.
Sure. Look, there's a few ways it can be done. There is organisations having tests of their security, right, of their technical controls they have in place through your ethical hacking or penetration testing of your environment, just to understand if there are any vulnerabilities that exist within your environment. So that's definitely one way to do it. The second way we see quite often with clients is conducting scenarios like phishing exercises and the like, to understand, what is the likelihood of people within your organisations actually clicking on links that come in, to the point we were just talking about before, right? So, and that's a good tool, not only to understand what your technical controls are, but also to baseline what that level of education awareness is like, that can be improved over time through some processes. The other thing too I'd note is, in the chance that something may or may not happen too, it's critical to make sure that you do have those incident response plans in place. And we've seen some great examples of organisations who've actually been able to respond quite well. If you look at the Australian Red Cross Blood Service as an example, right, they've been held out in a number of different papers to how they actually went about their response when they had their incident. So the more you can simulate, test, and just build muscle memory when it comes to an incident happening, so really that you don't lose trust through that exercise, but actually can build it as well. Those are just some simple ways that you can put in place to understand to where you're at, but from my perspective.
I'll just add, just add to the preparation going on from what Peter was saying. I think you do need to be prepared if a breach does occur. And if it does occur, have clear lines of reporting and accountability so that you know what to do in that event. We have a data breach procedure that allocates responsibility. You have to report it up to a member of the senior executive as soon as you become aware of it. An investigator has to be appointed. We have to determine whether it's a notifiable breach, rectification steps, etc. So that's in case the worst happens, of course. So just that's an added plank in preparation.
So pretty good. Marcus, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think they're all excellent suggestions.
Awesome. Cool. Do we have other questions?
Yeah, I think we have time just for one more question. And that is, obviously there's been so much high profile talk in the media recently about cybersecurity, and we've heard a little bit from the new Federal Minister for Cybersecurity talking about the importance of it and raising the profile generally. Any crystal balls or commentary, and I think this is probably for you, Peter, what's on the horizon, what do not-for-profits need to think about in terms of the next sort of 1 to 2 years, of any changes that might be coming their way in the regulatory or sort of in the environment that they need to be on top of?
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Look, I think we've definitely seen where this government, relative new government, is going to be focusing their attention when it comes to cyber and related laws and privacy. So the view I have is that there is more regulation coming in some way, shape or form, or some changes to that regulation. If you look at our Privacy Act, it was 1988 that it was actually initially became legislation. Yes, there's been updates, but if you look across the rest of the globe through Europe and their GDPR and other types of regulatory regimes, arguably we've got a long way to catch up when it comes to that. So I personally foresee changes in the privacy space coming through that organisations will need to consider. And in the cyber laws as well, right? The mandatory notification, we do have a notifiable breach through the Privacy Act at the moment, but I expect there will be some legislation in that space, but a lot remains to be seen, but I think we can expect something. So that's why it really comes down to preparing is, again, coming back to those points we've raised about understanding what data do you hold, what type of data, what protections do you have in place. You can't protect everything all the time. So, look at what those crown jewels are and make sure you've got those protections in place. So, again, no crystal ball, but if you see which way the wind's blowing, it looks like there's more coming down the pipe.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts from Siobhan, yourself, and Marcus?
Well, my only comment, Anne Baker, is that I agree with Peter that this is going to be, a growing area of concern for all organisations. And for not-for-profits, I know that resources are always a challenge, and we've talked about that. But to avail yourselves of expertise if you can, I don't think especially the smaller not-for-profits want to sort of reinvent the wheel here. There's a lot of information out. There's a lot of experts that you can partner with. Like Info Exchange, like PwC, who can provide really expert, guidance and advice in this space because it is such a challenge and it needs to be done right.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Marcus, just last 30 seconds before I wrap up. Anything from you to add?
Only my crystal ball says that it's going to get worse, not better. So don't, if you haven't started, please think about how you start. If you're not sure, check out the Digital Transformation Hub. We've got, what are the, getting started in the cyberspace, what are the things you need to consider? We've got the ability to ask an expert, so don't feel that you're alone.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Last 2 minutes, I would just wrap up by saying we've heard a lot about the threat landscape, what's going to happen in the future from a regulatory perspective. We know it's going to be worse than now. Australia has a lot to catch up on. Not-for-profit is a very vital sector. 1 in 10 Australians work for a not-for-profit sector. So this is a very important part of the economy and making Australia a cyber-safe economy. In terms of my key takeaways, starting from know your assets, what are your crown jewels, and you can't protect everything, so protect what's most valuable. That's one. Second is focus on the basic hygiene and start from basic controls like multi-factor authentication, backups, patching, access management, and education is very critical across all these areas. And the third key takeaway is test your processes, train your muscles and brains to respond to an incident when it happens, because incidents will continue to happen. There is no zero incident scenario that we face today. So thank you all very much for your time, and thank you panelists for providing your unique experiences and perspectives. Really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you. And we'll share where you can find more information after the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ambika. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah, bye.
You too. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.